A Palestinian boy who has been reported as killed by the IDF earlier I think the original story was back in May, and then it was sort of like coming in and out again and again. Basically, that he was killed by the IDF outside of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is something we've heard again and again. The fact that Palestinians are being killed at these aid sites with usually very little proof. And now another boy was reported as dead, and the idea found out that no, he's alive and well, and this has been basically a propaganda campaign. Another one. So this is the first topic we'll discuss today, and we'll take it then broadly into this idea of basically that Palestinians shouldn't leave Gaza, and then we'll talk about an interesting thing that came out of the Egypt's foreign ministry. Welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is Nicolas Provenzo. Nicolas, any opening thoughts from you about this?
Well, it's always interesting to kind of watch propaganda in play, and it's a factor in any war, any dispute. Both sides try to play to the larger audience. I I'm continually stunned by how brazenly dishonest the Palestinian, the Gaza, the Hamas propaganda is, and yet how they seem to get away with it. And I'll just give an anecdotal example. I'm riding my bike in my old hometown of Buffalo, New York. It's a beautiful Saturday morning, sunny, everything like that. And this lady is running down a side street, not even a main street, with a huge Palestinian flag. So this is like a massive display. She's by herself. Nobody's around. Nobody's looking at her or anything like that. But she's running, and it's like the painting of Liberty leading the way during the French Revolution. I mean, it's a big flag. It's billowing in the wind. And I'm just like, I'm gobsmacked watching this. And it just, what is the point? Why would you do it? What is the point of a lie? Why would you lie about the perils of war when the perils of war themselves are pretty bad? So, however you cut it, people are dying. You can argue one way or another. This one deserved it. This one didn't. But when it's, oh, this child died, and then they come up alive several months later, I find it very interesting, and I guess it speaks to core honesty. Like, for example, has the Gaza Health Foundation retracted and said we were in error? This is how we were in error. Did it explain the nature of its error? I don't think so. I haven't seen anything in my research of the story to indicate a retraction or a acknowledgement of how the error was made. And again, that would go to credibility. So are they even remotely acting in their own self-interest? I am trying to be truthful at all times. I'm correcting errors. I'm trying to give people an accurate lay of the facts on the ground. No. And yet you have this lady running around town with her Gaza flag, Palestinian flag, like it's cool. And that's just one of 1,000 misstatements, lies, exaggerations that go into the war. In contrast, I look at Israel's reporting and I find it very honest, very self-critical, and that it analyzes mistakes and explains where it's coming from, what its goals are. It seems to be clear, transparent, and honest. And yet it does feel like, I didn't see anybody in Buffalo running around with an Israeli flag. That to me, I just find it mystifying. So, there you have it.
Yeah, just a sort of quick correction. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is the American-Israeli joint organization that
Okay,
is
I
sort of
got
like
the
no, but
okay.
there is a former employee for Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is the person who originally spread
Okay.
this story. So yeah, maybe
Got
that's
my signals crossed. I apologize to the audience for my
uh,
error. Thank you for
yeah,
catching
but
me.
sort of yeah, a former employee, and yeah, as you said, I think we've a few weeks ago we mentioned this quote from Mark Twain, which is something like, a lie goes around twice around the earth before the truth puts its shoes on, or something like that. And this exactly plays in the same way, because you mentioned about the honesty of Israeli media. And the fact is, there is a story that was reported by a spokesperson for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. I think it was a month ago at this point, where Gaza Humanitarian Foundation employees or sort of aid workers were denied access in Gaza Nasser Hospital by Doctors Without Borders, and died because they were denied aid. Now, still, nobody in the media has reported on this. Nobody, even on the other side, has reported on this in a like, this was not true. So we have the Palestinian sort of media sources and even the mainstream media who report on every single thing as soon as it happens. And I don't even remember this number, where it was like, what was it, like 14,000 babies are gonna die in the next 48 hours. Everybody reported on it. It was a lie, that like straight up lie, which had absolutely no basis, yet it was reported on. So you have these Palestinian things where everything is immediately reported on, and you have the Israeli things where they are not even reported on the other side, as if this is not true. Because even once you report on something, it's already out there, right? Like, and that's going to be used. Now, for example, somebody in the chat says that, what about the Israeli propaganda about 40 beheaded babies? So that was never actually put out by the government of Israel. The government of Israel has never claimed there were 40 beheaded babies. Yet this is a lie that is still now repeated, despite the fact that from the start it wasn't really how it was. It was different stories that were, not to mention it was a fog of war. It was a different story that was put out, and not to mention, yeah, I could go into so many things, but let's get to the main topic. It's yeah,
I
it was.
guess I guess what this really makes me wonder is the nature of propaganda and why is it successful? And I see propaganda as misstatements, exaggerations, outright lies that chum the waters and trigger that very basic human response of the fight or flight. So it's to get you angry. Israelis kill babies, but in order for it to be successful, just like Joseph, go back to the 20th century master of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels and the Nazis. There has to be a sympathy for those arguments, an underlying something that the propagandists can exploit. And that's why I find so troubling, because it goes so counter to how a rational person operates. A rational person is constantly evaluating and reevaluating their position, because if anything, they want to make course corrections. If anything, they want to make sure that their fidelity to reality is solid. And so, like for example, in my country, the United States just did a missile attack on a Venezuelan boat, and apparently everybody on the boat were killed. And the narrative coming from the government is that this was a narco-terrorist boat that was engaged in trafficking, but the boat was in international waters. And I'm immediately the story has more questions than answers for me, because well, how did they know that this was a legitimate whatever? How is this a legitimate target in international waters? What was the fact finding that goes on here? How do you execute people summarily without a hearing? Was there other uses of force that would have not been lethal, that would have taken the boat out of traffic? And this is about my own country. I don't understand how we have ostensibly educated culture that isn't always asking those questions. And it's not being a ridiculous skeptic. It's like, those are honest questions. It's not just, I don't believe anything that I hear and I'm constantly reevaluating everything. You wouldn't have time for that. But when there's a controversy or, some sort of a dispute, you think you'd want to pause and ask the questions about what's being said, who's saying it, what their credibility has been, the whole nine yards. And if you did that honestly in the Israeli, Hamas battle, I think you would have no choice but to come up on that Israel is the substantially more credible voice, and Israeli voices are substantially more credible. Not that there aren't problems on the margins, but it's night and day. There's a world of difference, the essential difference that reveals that the Hamas side is wrong and propagating evil, and the Israeli side is right and attempting to defend good. And again, I'm just baffled that in the light of the totalitarian history of abuse of propaganda, that people aren't more attuned to it and can sniff it out and suspect it better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and something to remember about propaganda, because oftentimes when I call something propaganda, the response is, "Well, you think that's not true?" And the propaganda doesn't necessarily mean lie. It means focus, or it can mean disproportionate focus on something, or sort of like focus on something without the actual context. So something like, showing uh, talking about the civilian suffering of the Palestinians. The reason why this propaganda is because it ignores the fact that, yes, there are people suffering, but one, civilians are also responsible for this war. Palestinians have started October 7. They've joined with them. They held hostages. Two, all the deaths of civilians is on the Hamas side and on the Palestinian side. And three, that majority, or not majority, but large number of the people who are getting killed are Hamas members, since Israel is really accurate when it comes to and proper when it comes to dealing with this. So another example I usually use is Ukraine, and when people focus on the Azov battalion, or the fact that Nazis are controlling Ukraine, it's the fact that, yes, the former sort of Azov battalion did have very neo-Nazi sort of people pushing. Once it was integrated into the Ukrainian army, one, it was a very small fraction of the whole company that even had these sort of like neo-Nazi ties. And two, we are talking about a country that, one, is led by a Jewish person, and doesn't actually have this. Like, if you look at their government, you don't see any like neo-Nazi elements in the actual government itself. I think there was one sort of like far right group, and they basically have absolutely no power because the country itself is, of course, not neo-Nazi. So again, it might be true that part of it had sort of neo-Nazi ties, but to paint Ukraine as a neo-Nazi state, that's the propaganda.
It's
So
an
it's this.
overbroad
Yeah.
accusation. Yeah, exactly. I think if someone was looking to see this play out in art, I think the movie Judgment at Nuremberg, the Spencer Tracy movie, where the Nazi war criminals are on trial and they're afforded a legal defense. And the speech at the end of the movie in their defense is given by the actor Maximilian Schmel, and it was absolutely brilliant. I think it won him the Academy Award. In where the question before the court is who's really to blame for the Nazis and the violence that the Nazis enacted. And his speech is the best case argument in favor of the defendants. And he's saying, well, but look at all the Russians embraced him, the Pope embraced him, the American industrialists embraced him. Aren't they also to blame? If these men are to blame, isn't the world also to blame? And you could say that's the best defense for the people on the dock. But even if that were true, it didn't eclipse the guilt of the people on the dock. And the court quite rationally and appropriately sentenced them according to the law. And so what it shows you is a process of evaluating claims, making the best arguments for both sides, and coming to a just decision, which is seeing everything in its full context. What do these men deserve? And in this case, it was punishment. So, yes, there'll always be, the other side has its case, but what is the larger judicial, thoughtful position here? And again, in the case of Hamas versus Israel, to me, it just seems so patently clear that if you sat and you thought about it, honestly, what are the requirements of human life? How are civilized people supposed to live with one another despite their differences, often deep differences? How do you address grievances from the past in a way that limits future pain? Israel wins hands down every time. And again, that this process of a just evaluation isn't more culturally ingrained, I'll say, is distressing. And it just makes the case that, as an objectivist, I want to make the case for how one evaluates these often vexing questions fairly, justly, and with the right kind of temperament that, solves problems, not perpetuates them.
Yeah, and that's why even when it comes to sort of like Israel and sometimes I hear about, well, do you criticize Israel? But again, it's sort of like what are we comparing? And again, I would like sort of like use the state of Ukraine, right? Like as soon as this war ends, I'm gonna be probably a big critic of Ukraine because it still has a lot of problems. It's probably the most corrupt state, even once it joins, or even if they will try to join EU, I'll be very harsh on like you actually need to
Right,
fulfill
right,
all
right,
those
right,
things.
right. It's not that they're
And
free of problems. It's that in comparison to the aggression lost against them by Russia, they are the innocent party.
yeah, and
So yeah,
sort of going back to Israel, I think I once heard from Dave Smith say something like, "Well, you say Israel is a free state. The majority of their land is like held by the government," and I think it is true. Like a large amount of property is or land is owned by the Israeli government, which of course, it's problematic and to some extent understandable. A lot of Israel land is just desert that is not really used, and of course, when you actually put it into the free countries, American state, both the federal and state, if you include it together, owned about 37%
yeah, they
of
own
the
the
land.
West. They own the federal government and Alaska. They own Alaska. So
Which again is not defense
exactly.
that that's a good thing, but again, trying to, when we are talking about one state that absolutely has no recognition, or not even state, and I mean Gaza has no recognition of individual rights, is trying to genocide the other side, is continuous, is executing. I think one of the stories that I wanted to cover today, but didn't have time, is Hamas is planning to execute some of their people because they consider them Israeli spies. So you have like a government that is actively executing its people, and even before, even if you say, well, what if they are government spies? We have examples of Palestinians who spoke out against Hamas, and either their family or themselves were executed. So again, trying to compare that and to maybe Israel government has too much land, it's like night and day difference. Like it doesn't even come to mind as like a, why would I even bother criticizing? It's like I always say, it's the same example as if you see somebody murdering three people and somebody jaywalking, and you say, hey, that guy is jaywalking. Like,
Yeah,
yes, you
you
are
don't care about
correct,
crime. Yeah,
but
you don't care about crime because you let him jaywalk. But like what are you talking about? I mean, yeah, apples and oranges and substantially different uh offenses. Exactly, and there. I mean, there are principles that guide us here. Like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Is Israel compared to what's around it good? Absolutely. Does Israel have faults? If I were an Israeli, would I be calling for certain things? Might I apply a different approach to its problems? Probably, but I'm that same way in my own country. So, yeah, it's interesting. But it's also interesting to see how cunning the propagandists are in throwing that wall. And it's to slow your ability to think and process. Like, someone sides with the Palestinians over the Israelis, and they point out all Israelis' problems. They're shifting the discussion from what's going on here with the conflict between Israel and Hamas and who threw the first punch to Israel's sundry problems as a state, like any other state. And the way I've experienced that being thrown at me is it's a machine gun of facts, bah, 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 bah. And more than I could ever know, because they got the laundry list and they've got it memorized, and more than I have personal knowledge of. But they're throwing them at, and then you got to sit there and try and come back and refute it. And again, what is the core principle here? Who threw the first violent punch? And I would argue in this case it was Hamas. And you can dispute that, but there I go. That's my premise. And so, talk about Israel's problems on the margin when you're talking about physical force killing people in their homes. I then you've shown they're not being objective. They're just, again, a propagandist for their cause. And they're not operating by a rational standard. And if you're not going to persuade them, at least you can try and persuade the audience around them. So, but it's interesting. I always experience it as I describe it as a machine gun of, fact bullets, true or false or whatever, but they're just gunning you down with 1,000 different things. You're cognitively overwhelmed, and then you gotta, shut it down and redirect the conversation to what is actually the key essential: who threw the first punch.
Yeah,
And
by the way, that has a name. It's called the Gish-Gallop fallacy. It's basically you throw a bunch of things, and there is no argument against it, because either you have to accurately respond to every single thing. Let's say it can be like 10 things, every single thing they can say, and if you just say one thing wrong, well, they can focus on that thing, and now you've lost because you've already entered into your weakest thing. So the solution to the Gish-Gallop strategy is basically to shut them down and say, let's go one by one, and we can talk about them one by one if you want to.
yeah, or I would say focus on, redirect towards key essentials. What's the key essential to this? Israel's land policy in regards to government ownership of land in the desert, or is it okay to paraglide into a music venue and slaughter the concert goers? So yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Now, sort of moving or coming back to the topic. So, again, this boy was found, and something that was said, there was a video posted by Fox, and something that was said by the mother. She said, because now they are safely out of Gaza, she said, I want to travel for my son's best interest. I'm leaving out of my free will. No one pressured me. And now I'm just, if more people were interested in their son's best interest, like this mother, this war probably wouldn't have happened. But sort of that brings me to this main idea of basically this idea that Palestinians should stay. Nobody should ever leave. Nobody should ever be allowed to leave. And it's this, again, sort of, I don't, or even this focus on, of UNRWA and the fact that every single Palestinian is a refugee, and the goal is to eventually like get them back. And my idea is like, what does that, people always talk about collectives, but when it comes to individual, what does that life actually looks like? This like mystical way of maybe one day we'll go back to this Palestine once all the Jews are gone. How about like actually like again, I cannot imagine being born in. We're not even talking about Israel, right? We are talking about like Gaza, or being born in Iran, being born in. I don't want to generalize Africa, but pretty much any third world country, and having the ability to go to the United States of America, which again, for me, it's pretty much impossible to immigrate to. It would like I think I have like a 2% chance every single year to get the
Right.
visa
Great.
to get the lottery visa, and even then it's not 100% sure. And you get a chance to become, because if you're a refugee and you go to America, you have pretty much like a full path towards citizenship potential. I think after maybe 5 years, maybe more. I'm not sure if it's different with the refugee status, but you have this like incredible opportunity, and your goal is to go back to Gaza, out of all places, or even to sort of this Palestine once all the Jews are gone. I mean, how much more? Uh, I don't know what to even call it. Like anti-life can you be? And the fact that you want this for Palestinians, you want them to go back, Nicholas.
I there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, first of all, as an American, I'm just horrified that the United States doesn't make it easy for people who are motivated and peaceable to immigrate and at least establish residency. I'm a kind of person where residency easy, citizenship hard, and just by hard means a commitment to supporting and defending the Constitution as our political union. Um, I think one of the proudest things I've done in my life is instill in my son that the human mind is the ultimate resource, and that, he's 11 and he gets it, and so that's our superpower. So if you believe that the human mind is the ultimate resource, then you see people as assets, assets that you want to liberate for your own selfish interest. Because, you know, again, if I believe in trade, then the better my trading partners, the richer my life. So, you know, just approaching it from that angle, that people are assets, that, you know, liberating them, unshackling them, allows them to produce and create and build a society on those lines, and that we're not and they're not, is very disheartening. And it feels like the world's in a retrograde motion, as I see it. The fact that in America there's this very large, vocal, and right now powerful anti-immigrant mentality. So, you know, instead of the Haitians being assets, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. You know, instead of South Americans building our homes, they're all rapists, murderers, and criminals. And, you know, again, a very propagandic generalization that's not true. You know, in any subgroup, you have your fair share of criminals. My partner's late husband murdered by an American soldier in Iraq. You know, there are criminals in any society, but, you know, you have this generalization that's used to forbid people from entering, rebuilding their lives. And you wonder, like, if this woman wants something for her son and she came to a free state and was required to support the foundations of that free state as part of her admission, would that change? That's the other thing too, is I don't disagree with, is the idea that people are monolithic and that they can't change, they can't grow, they can't learn. What would, you know, that there's a fear, well, if we bring too many of them, they'll just bring whatever badness they espouse here, and there's nothing, we're defenseless against it. But you have to argue for your civilization all the time. It's an ongoing struggle. What is the argument that one could make to this individual? All right, you're going to come here. That's great. I'm thrilled for you. I'm thrilled for your son, because you're going to be free of the murder that you've been exposed to thus far. But in order to live here, you have to do the following. You have to respect other people's beliefs, even when you disagree. So I get to draw my Muhammad cartoon, and you have to live with it. But I'm not going to stop you from practicing your creed, because I have to live with what you do in your own life. And I have to tolerate it just as you have to tolerate me. And that's the nature of our society. And let's live together within those rules. You know, if you could you convince her of that? I would hope. I think we should. I think we should try. And when someone acts violently in the face after that, you know, period of education, well, then the consequences are on them. They've made themselves the enemy of mankind. But up until then, you know, I think there's a requirement to persuade, because, again, you know, it's a human life.
Just quickly, somebody in the chat says it's anti-illegal immigration. Let's be clear. I could believe that maybe in 2016 Trump, that, oh, it's only anti-illegal. But no, at this point, it's clear that it's... Because again, even when we are talking about refugees, those are legal people. They claimed refugee status, which is like a legal doctrine in America. The big problem is that the courts are basically backlogged, and it takes time to basically deal with every single, and basically decide if they sort of do deserve this protection. But again, I could believe it, but no, at this point it's clear, especially with, again, this amount of like focus on deporting everybody and this demonization. Because again, every single president deported millions of people, including Trump, without pretty much any big issue. At least I don't remember even Trump one having like this the same amount of sort of vitriol that is going on right now in his first presidency. So there is a different thing that's going on, and it is truly hatred of immigration. And again, it like, if every American liked American immigration, then it would be easier. Again, like, question I would have for every single thing who says it's only illegal immigration. Question for me.
You put the speed limit down to 5 miles an hour on the interstate, and you say, I'm not against driving down the road. I'm just against speeding. You know, give me a break. Immigration is substantially throttled into the United States. We make it hard, we make it difficult, and for law-abiding people. I know people personally who are trying to bring their wives, their foreign-born wives, the mother of their children, in the United States, and they can't without undue sacrifice. It's just ridiculous. And so, yeah, the legal, I almost see that as a Mott and Bailey, because it's, yeah, it makes sense. I support the rule of law. Who wouldn't? But you're evading the nature of the law as it is being enforced. And the nature of the law as it is being enforced is that it is draconianly restrictive and just not supportable in any way, shape, or form. If you believe that human people are an asset, that the mind is the ultimate resource. If you reject that, if you just look at them as foreigners and threats and every other pejorative out there, they're eating the cats, they're eating their dogs. Well, then yeah, there you go. This all makes sense. So I don't buy it for a heartbeat.
Yeah, and just quickly, Deborah in the chat says, no, real asylum seekers don't leave a safe country. Illegal aliens stream over the border, and when caught, falsely claim they are seeking asylum. Just question, which country south of the border is even considered like a safe country? Haiti? Well, why is there a folk like Haiti is not a safe country? People who are living Haiti or Cuba. Wasn't that a recent sort of, or maybe somewhat recent, few months ago, where people are being deported back to Cuba? Is that like a safe country, or even like Mexico itself, right?
Mexico, they're just they're just talking about how 150,000 people have been disappeared. No one knows where. That's a happy place to be. Of course, you're going to have people fleeing that kind of brutality. Guatemala. I mean, I can't. Venezuela,
El Salvador.
El Salvador, Nicaragua. Name a country, Costa Rica. Where's the happy place? Because if it was, then people would be migrating to that place. So no, I don't see it that way at all. The facts don't support that conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, my question would then be, why does it like I'm European, there's no such thing, but people who talk about sort of like immigration from Europe is okay. Well, I'm somebody from Slovakia, and as I said, it's pretty much impossible for me to realistically like. I want to immigrate right now. I pretty much have to wait, I think, one more month before I can either enter the lottery. Then I have to wait, I think, 8 months since until they even pick the winners of the lottery, where I have about 2% chance that I even
is
win.
that the American flag you're flying in the corner there? I mean, I'm seeing the red and white stripes. Yeah, I mean, a good guy. More American than the American. It's just painful, and I apologize as a citizen who loves his country, but wants a better way. That people like you have to go through that, and it's very distressing. And
yeah,
no,
and
again,
again,
be here in a New York minute. So,
and that's the biggest problem. It's not even because people say people who are defending the system often say, well, people should go with the proper processes. But proper processes oftentimes mean just wait 20 years. Like there's literally nothing I can do right now to sort of like speed the process. Oftentimes it just involves basically wait, unless you have a family there or have already an active job opportunity there, or you can invest like hundreds of thousands, or I think the new Trump thing where you can like pay like how much was it that you can pay? Like
$1 million
millions.
for the golden visa. So as an attorney, when Trump 1 came around, I was kind of interested, like, well, what is this immigration stuff really like? Because I didn't know a whole lot of the process. So I did was I volunteered at a immigration clinic in my community in Alexandria, Virginia, and help people fill out the form that you have to fill out in order to apply for a green card. And I mean, each applicant, I pretty much spent 3 or 4 hours putting everything all together. And again, there's a bunch of attorneys there, and we're all trying to help as many people as we can. And there's a queue out the door, people requesting assistance here. And these are people who have are already residents, but are just trying to get their permanent residency or whatever. They got a toehold in the U.S. And
Yeah,
now they're just trying to get the green card.
That's actually funny because once you get you get into the US, you still have to, as you say, sort of
you
like
still
fill
have
out
to
the
convert
form
that to permanent
to
residency.
become a permanent resident. Yeah.
And now the questions are, some of them are ridiculous. Like, are you a member of the Nazi party, or did you work, so you're talking about it's aimed at the 80-year-olds or something like that. So the form hasn't caught up with current events. Uh, this would be shocking to a lot of people. It basically requires the declarant to swear that if commanded, they would serve basically as serfs on behalf of the United States government. So if there was a national emergency and you wanted to direct little old ladies to make sandbags or something like that, they're promising that they would adhere to that. Lots of questions. Have you ever used violence? Have you ever been convicted of this? Have you ever been convicted of that? And then, when you have the invariable traffic ticket that shows up on people's blotter, how do you explain that so that it doesn't trigger a rejection? It was a fascinating process. And I would encourage people, even if they're not lawyers, just to look up the form, the green card form, and just look at the questions that it asks. And then ask yourself, is this a fair test of residency? And I would argue that a lot of people who thump their chests about immigration, when they were actually confronted with the procedures and policies and questions that are asked, the forms that have to be filled out, they might rethink themselves. They might check the premise.
And it's also kind of weird because if you get to that status, you probably already went to through an interview in your own country on an American embassy. You've already submitted the police records from your own country and from every country you've ever lived in, which is what you had to do. You've entered your high school diploma or your work or the fact that you worked. So you've already went through all these processes. Now,
and what's fascinating is when people are at odds with their government, so they are refugees, they are fleeing, they're trying to escape persecution. They're still required to, show the paper trail, and that's sometimes very difficult to do. Again, when you're an enemy of your native state. So, I mean, this idea that we're just rolling over our border and allowing people to pell-mell come in regardless of their background. It's just a lie. And again, look at the form, look at the paperwork, look at the bureaucratic nonsense that our government demands as a result of immigration. And then the fact, like a guy like you got quotas and basically a minuscule chance of winning the dice roll. So yeah, it's very frustrating. But it was eye-opening to see firsthand and work with people in that regard.
Yeah, and not to mention okay, just a funny anecdote. There was one game I've played where sort of you like are control in like a political situation of a country, and there was a time where I started encouraging illegal population because I had so little people when it comes to because I was so productive as a society, but I had so little people to actually work in that I started promoting illegal immigration just to get like more people. But again, when it comes to yeah, when it comes to even sort of illegal immigration, again, when Russian tanks start like going over my border, you bet your ass I'm gonna illegally immigrate. I mean, again, for many of those people, like their choice is either to die in their own country or possibly even dying on the route to America. So again, oftentimes it's yeah, they are taking a great risk for something better.
There's always been an undercurrent of nativism, and it's kind of funny because I mean, America is a country of immigrants, but it was always the person who got here first hated the person who came later. They hated the Irish, they hated the Polish. My family's half Polish, and suffice it to say, I have some relatives who are very pro-Trump, and I was intrigued to see how they would respond to the history of bias against Poles immigrating to America in the context of today's disputes. And it was kind of funny because it never happened. Oh, we were the model immigrants. Everybody, no, they didn't love you. And you should know from family history that they didn't love you because there were people in their lives who talked about how they were not loved. And to embrace that and reject seeing human beings as a resource, as allies, as traitors to make a better world is that we're at this point is just again very distressing to me, and I would love to see a movement that proudly declares that it welcomes and embraces immigrants. Like the Neil Diamond song, "They're Coming to America." Play that while they show images of people naturalizing and creating and building and making America better. Let's focus on that instead of this dishonest narrative that every would-be immigrant is a would-be rapist. So, or murderer. And it's just like, I can't say how upsetting I find it. So there you go.
Yeah. Uh, Now, sort of like, I guess going a little bit back, and well, I guess just one more thing. I mean, you mentioned Polish immigrants, while the Irish immigrants were called white N-word, literally by many. So again, this is the fact that like Irish are viewed as white in America right now is like a pretty, I'm not gonna say like recent phenomenon, but it's definitely wasn't a standard back then, because again, every single immigrant group coming into America did receive that kind of treatment, sort of unfortunately. Um, but yeah, sort of going back, there was a recent statement from the Egypt's foreign ministry about the Palestinian issue, where they've talked about how they pretty much will not allow any Gazans to enter Egypt or migrate, because the goal is to keep them in Gaza as a thorn in Israel. We know arms have been smuggled into Gaza from through the Egyptian border. There were tunnels found going under the crossings to basically smuggle arms. So again, this is another example of how every single Arab nations pretty much don't want to have Palestinians in their own country. Even the countries that do have long history with having Palestinians, for example, Jordan, are not necessarily keen of them, since Palestinians are so radicalized that pretty much every country they are in, they try to overthrow it. They always support the Muslim Brotherhood chapters in them, which again are Islamist party groups. I mean, go into the recent Jordanian election where I think some time ago somebody joked about that if Palestinians voted in Jordanian election, they would elect Muslim Brotherhood. And you go into last election and they've elected majority Muslim Brotherhood, meaning or plurality. Muslim Brotherhood was the biggest faction they had. So again, nobody wants the Palestinians to actually be in their country, but everybody wants them to stay there so they can attack Israel. So
Israel. I mean, it's very telling because, again, if you saw the Palestinians as an asset, you'd at least support partial migration. Build a better Egypt, but that they don't see that. And again, it's just to create a Palestinian ghetto, more or less, to be a thorn on Israel's side. Again, is an incredible tell as to how the Arab world itself evaluates the Palestinians and the problems and questions that they pose. Why wouldn't you value at least individual immigration? Create a screening process or something like that, so the mother and her child can safely immigrate and build a new life in Egypt and a better life in Egypt. But to deny that, and also, there's no mention of Hamas in this statement. What are they demanding? I guess it's the Palestinian Authority back in charge.
which, by the way, Hamas doesn't agree with.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that they want a ceasefire, which would mean Hamas does get preserved, but Hamas doesn't want to go back into the Palestinian Authority. So I'm not sure how exactly they are planning to square that one.
Yeah, the question I would have if I were a diplomat would be, how do you then propose the question of Hamas gets answered? And I would reject any answer that preserves them. So, I mean, I'm unequivocal in that regard. Hamas must be destroyed, and Hamasism must be destroyed. And so, how do the Egyptians propose to achieve that? Well, they apparently they don't. And so, again, it's just they're perfectly content to see a bloodletting of a people that they don't care about, just to subvert Israel. It's vicious. It's collectivist. It's vicious, and it just increases the human suffering here. Because
Yeah,
what do you really want to do? You want to break Hamas's back. How do you break Hamas's back? Well, one way is to kill them all, and I certainly support that. The other way is deny them people and treasure to command. And so if there was a migration of peaceable Gazans, that would weaken Hamas. So, the practicality of how you screen is a legitimate question. So I could see Egypt raising that concern. But yeah, and then you wonder, well, why do they tolerate Hamas while supporting the PA? A lot more questions than answers here. Like what's their end game? Other than we're perfectly content to see a bloodletting and continued struggle as long as it casts Israel in a bad light.
Yeah, I mean, even with the Palestinian Authority, it's I mean, again, they are not even that much better than Hamas, and even then they're not even popular among the Palestinian people. So again, you are trying to get an organization that doesn't have even the what do we call that, sort of like, I guess, like authority of its own people, like a delegation of its own people. Like Palestinian Authority is deeply unpopular. Mahmoud Abbas is incredibly unpopular, and you want them to sort of like negotiate on behalf of Palestinians. Well, they do not want that. And even then, again, like trying to deal with it, trying to still establish the Palestinian state. I mean, again, it's and trying to do it by force, trying to do it by forcing Israel. Israel has already again and again sort of like tried to step back and give more to the Palestinian Authority, and every single time they used it to attack Israel. Now, this is a fault of Israel to large extent. The first intifadas should have been absolutely suppressed and not allowed to actually turn into eventually the Oslo Accords, because that's what gave it to them. Again, after 67, there was if you were a Palestinian, you were a permanent resident of the Israeli state. You were free to travel across all of Israel and Jordan. I think it was called something like bridge policy or open bridge policy or two bridge policy, something like that.
Right,
You
right.
were pretty much allowed to freely travel. And at some point, the Palestinians have decided, and not even many of them, it's just was sort of accepted. They decided, no, we'll try to go and fight against Israel. And now you see a lot of Palestinian groups even trying to pull back. I think the sheiks of Hebron specifically are talking about basically potentially seceding from the Palestinian Authority and become sort of like a emirate inside of Israel, which is something that is even being pushed by Bezalel Smotrich of basically annexing like more than 80% of Judea and Samaria and basically establishing, I think it would be like 6 emirates inside of it.
I wonder what the model here for success is. And I wonder, is it the Irish model? Because there you had bloody sectarian violence that was deeply ingrained within the culture, and the Good Friday Accords squelched that. What does it look like? And the objectivist answer is, of course, there has to be philosophic ideological change, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think the Palestinians are animated by vicious ideas, and as long as they remain animated, they're doomed. And those around him have to bear the cost, which is unfair. Just brainstorming, would it be, you know, I think Gaza has to be occupied. Hamas has to be utterly broken. It has to be completely removed. The schools have to change. The culture has to be pointed towards change, just like it was in denazification and the occupation of Japan. But who does the occupation? Is it a coalition of Arab states? Is it Israel itself? Does Israel want to bear the cost? Those are questions I don't have ready answers to. But I definitely think that Hamas's destruction and the destruction of the ideology that animates it are absolutely essential. And how do you achieve that? How do you practically bring that into being in a non-sacrificial way? And it's something that I don't have a ready answer for. But it's an interesting question, because right now it's this low-level bloodletting that goes on and on and on, and then it becomes grievance upon grievance and vengeance upon vengeance, and it's not going to engineer peace. And so what has to change? The world has to accept that Hamas needs to go the way of the dodo, and it doesn't yet. I don't know. It's very distressing.
Well, I think what absolutely can happen is one, a complete or even partial deportation of majority of Palestinians from Gaza. They've shown again and again that they simply are not willing to sort of or live side by side with Israel peacefully. Now, let's say we're talking about 1 or 2 million. It's not even that many people if you go to sort of all the past deportation that have happened. So I think that is a possible thing because again, occupation, I don't think Israel would be able to do it properly because, not to mention, many people would die. Occupation is a tough thing. Israel failed it in the past because it basically just created a bunch of like Rafah and Gaza City, which were inside of Israel, but were pretty much no-go Jew zones because this is the way it was. So it would either have to be complete occupation, which would be hard, would be a decade-long situation, and I'm not sure if even possible, since now there is so much push towards Palestinian violence and encouraging Palestinian violence. Israel was able to integrate sort of, I think, originally like 1 million Arabs when Israel was originally founded. But back then, nobody cared as much about the Israeli. It wasn't even Israeli-Palestinian issue yet, right? It was the Israeli-Arab conflict. So nobody cared as much. So I think it was easier to do so. And even then, Arabs in Israel are not sort of the best thing there is. The fact is, all of them are pretty much united around either communism or even straight up Islamism, and they do want the destruction of Israel. So I'm not calling for they are full citizens, they have full rights, but sort of unless the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is resolved, the Arabs inside of Israel are still a problem. So
They have to remain an ideological minority. I don't like forced migrations. That's there's a lot of human damage that comes with that, and so I don't I'm reluctant to embrace that. In fact, I just don't see it working. So I would put that off the table. What I do wonder, I mean, it's basically the classic counterinsurgency strategy. You have a one of the good, despise the Confederacy as I do, one of the good things that they did was they actually surrendered. When their military position became untenable, they surrendered their army and they did not engage in guerrilla warfare. Here you have something different. You have a side that embraces guerrilla warfare, embraces unconventional fighting, embraces the rejection of the law of war, and that's their essential nature. That's their shtick. And so, how do you defeat that? And where has that occurred in the past? And what did it take? I think those are the questions that I find myself wanting answers to. And I don't know the answers to those questions. And I wish John Lewis, the late objectivist historian John Lewis, was still alive. It could be very interesting just because he had such an expansive knowledge of the history of warfare to examine what broke a counterinsurgency's will. An insurgency's will. I'm sorry.
I
What
mean,
broke an insurgency's
the big
will?
thing is that they pretty much never happen because usually the people that are in the occupied land either get completely genocided, like in the case of Turkey, or get completely deported, like in the case of, let's say, Poland or Czechoslovakia after World War II, or even Russia. All the Germans were straight up deported, or most of the Germans were straight up deported from those territories. Or even when it comes to sort of the Japanese occupation of most of Asia, all of the Japanese people that settled those new lands were afterwards deported. So you are sort of dealing with like again, if I'm trying to go through my history and I like besides the founding of Israel when they and even then like you even that cannot necessarily be called like full-on occupation, although Arabs were under military sort of rule for a little bit until they were fully recognized as citizens. But even then they've already accepted in the past that Arabs are going to be part of Israel since from the UN declaration, which would involve about 40% Arabs anyway. But when it comes to Palestinians, you are dealing with sort of group that is so poisoned to basically, yeah, destroy the Israeli nation, destroy, kill all the Jews.
That's where I think the abdication of ideas in the West is so deadly and perpetuates violence. Because I think if the West were more forceful in defending its virtues and more demanding of the Islamic world to recognize these virtues, just an argument, again, just in philosophic debate, and was less compromising as it is today, I would predict, see an erosion of support for this ridiculous faith-driven worldview that has no justification in reality. But that weakness in the West comes with a devastating, is devastating at any number of. And I think that's the problem, I guess, if you really push down to it. It's a question of ideas. And right now, the West does not assert the ideas to defeat the faith-driven ideology that Hamas and its adherents support. And I guess that's the fault line. And the violence will continue without a solution until either the West asserts itself or faith drives the world again. And God help us if faith drives the world again. So that's pretty funny. God help us. Yeah, that's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, even when it comes to sort of the occupation of Israel, my sort of biggest worry is it has to be like, I don't think any Arab state can do it properly. If it's done, it's to be done by Israel. But then I don't think Israel itself will be able to handle it because, again, we are talking about military occupation, so decades long sort of occupation where IDF soldiers will die and where even civilians will die. The fact is, if you even want to occupy Gaza, you need to allow Israelis to settle inside of Gaza. The same way, basically, like you can only govern over land where you have people. In a similar way, America could say manifest destiny and we own all of the West, but unless there are actual people that are living there, it doesn't really mean anything. The people that you can protect and the people that are actually living in that land. So, um, yeah, basically the same amount people will need to go into Gaza if we ever hope to during the occupation, if we ever
Yeah,
hope
I don't
to.
think there's anything in the Arab world that gives them the ideas to squelch a Hamas. It's just tribal, our tribe versus your tribe. That's how I see most of the Arab governments, just tribal organizations, vaguely aligned by their support for Islam, but animated by Islam, but for tribal. So they're not leading the way. Israel, why would the Hamas adherents listen to Israelis in this regard? They're not. They haven't yet. So yeah, it's a black hole right now.
Well, I think that's my biggest worry is at this point, I don't think the Palestinian spirit can be crushed, which I think that's something you have to do towards the occupation. Even when we think about the sort of the civil war in America, right? It wasn't actually done properly because the sort of the ideology that fueled the racism and slavery wasn't fully crushed because we had the Jim Crow era
Right.
afterwards.
Yeah, Jim Crow
Because
at the end. Yeah. And I absolutely agree. And I've said that many times in my own analysis of the Civil War was, the failure to impose Reconstruction consistently led to tremendous human suffering. And so, yeah, the compromise with evil only perpetuates evil. And again, that goes to the moral question, the moral bankruptcy of our the
yeah, and
West.
just quickly, the reason why it applies in Gaza is at this point, Israel is already occupying more than 80%, I think, of Gaza. And even in Gaza City, I think they already claim they occupy about a third. Now, once you occupy something, you have to actually take care of people of those lands. That, like, at this point, we cannot starve them. We cannot, like, not allow the resources to go in since they are already administered by Israel. So at this point, there is no way for them to get to surrender since we are already occupying them. So what should have happened from day one is stop all resources from going in and wait for them to surrender. But now, and especially after this operation, all of Gaza will be occupied by Israel, and they haven't surrendered. So Palestinians have never surrendered, have never felt the suffering of really this war, since they've always have been allowed food. They've always had, and they've never felt. They've always felt that if problems are happening, it was because of Israel, not because of
Right,
Hamas. So
right. I
they've
know
never felt
the
the
victim
consequences of
blaming
their
the
actions.
yeah, the victim blaming the aggressor blaming the victim for his plight. I wonder if the analogy is what we do to a prisoner. You know, someone commits murder, they're on the run for a while. Law enforcement tracks them, captures them. They're held to a trial, and they're judged accordingly. And then there's the punishment phase. You are now in prison, and in prison, your life is regimented. You don't get to do what you want to do. You get to do what you're told to do according to the rules of the prison, and that's understood as proper and just. And in a reality, Gaza, through the conduct of Hamas, is de facto turning itself into a prison, and so it will require, in order to pacify the ongoing threat, rule like a prison. So you will not be able to teach Jew hatred in the schools. The schools will have to teach this curriculum, and you're going to be monitored. And you're going to have to report at such and such a time because you have an obligation to take care of your own life. So you're going to have to engage in productive work. And so it would be a commanded and controlled society because it's broken on a fundamental level. Its premise is that it has a right to kill and destroy the state of Israel. It does not. So I wonder if it just admitting that and saying, yes, by the nature of the Gazan culture, it will require this level of command and control, which runs counter to what objectivists think. We want to liberate people, but you can only liberate people who respect your rights. If you don't, then the rules have changed. And what does that look like? What does it entail? What does it require to engender a better world? I don't know.
Somebody says Arabs productive and puts like a question
Yeah,
mark and
well,
an exclamation point.
wouldn't it be nice if there was a change? Because there was a time in the world where the West wasn't productive, when the West was living in its own filth. So, cultures can change. Unfortunately, it takes a long time for it to happen, but it needs to happen. So how do you begin? Where do you begin? I don't know. Good question.
Which I'm not sure if was like a racist statement, but funnily enough, once you take people out of their repressive dictatorships and put them in free countries like a bunch of European countries or America, suddenly, and they grew up in that culture, suddenly they can be productive. I mean, it's
Well,
almost as
the
if
history of America is replete with people of Arab descent who have gone on to integrate and lead fantastically productive, brilliant lives. So it's nothing. Yeah, if that was a racist claim, I wholeheartedly reject it. People have free will and free minds, and I want to see them liberated. But when you have an individual who embraces evil and they are violent towards you, you have a right to protect yourself and demand they change. When again, their weapon, their means of dealing with you is through violence. So there you
yeah,
go.
not to mention a big surprise to some people, a lot of Jews are actually brown. A lot of them have
I know. Like it's so ridiculous. It'd be interesting to do DNA profiles to see just how much shared history there actually is. And the regardless, whatever that came up with, doesn't matter. Everyone is the individual human being with a fully efficacious, competent mind. And I don't buy the everyone yearns to be free, but I do buy that you have the tools to be free, and it's there. And wouldn't it be nice if we found a way to unleash it? They found a way to unleash it. So there you go.
Somebody says suddenly everyone changes their ideology as soon as they move. I mean, it kind of depends to a large extent. Again, like the same thing. It matters if the integration is sort of even encouraged or what is being put forward, because I think the Western countries need to say our culture is better. Now, there are parts of your culture maybe you get to keep, but some parts of your culture maybe you should probably abandon, especially if they are backward or not
Yeah,
compatible
wouldn't
with
it be nice
Western
if
ideas.
the best parts surface? So, I get my Mediterranean food, and they get the benefit of the rule of law and respect for individual rights. I mean, that to me seems like a very fair trade. So, yeah, in a rational world, you're trying to identify the best from whatever your relationships have to offer. So someone comes and they bring, a rich tapestry of beauty here that I didn't otherwise possess or was capable of producing, and I bring a rich tapestry of value here. Yeah, let's meet in the middle and share. So, absolutely.
With that, any last thoughts from you, Nicholas? And where can people find you?
You can find me on Substack, and I think if there's anything from today's talk, it's the core idea that either the mind is the ultimate resource or it isn't, and we need to go to those first principles and try and find a solution to this quandary that liberates and unshackles this part of the world from the mysticism that infects it. There you go.
Well, with that, thank you, Nicholas, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective. Until then, bye bye.